I'm awake. Are you?
I wonder how many miles I've fallen. It seems I'll get to the center of the earth. Curious, isn't it? And really, nothing's quite impossible.
Let's go now to our new episode of the Unfiltered Rise with me, Heidi Love.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Unfiltered Rise with me, Heidi Love. And today I have with me Tony McMahon, or is it McMahon?
No, it's just McMahon.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he is an investigative historian, an author, and journalist, and currently writing some amazing books he's just telling me about right before we rolled. And man, that third one, am I interested? But the second one is hot on the presses, and you have to read them all because, won't make sense, right?
Well, I think so. I mean, the first one. I mean, actually, I'll just hold it up, shall I? There we go. There's the first one, the Knights Templar History and Mystery, which is I'm basically doing the kind of the history of the Crusades and why the Templars set up and all that. Second one, we can come to that, is kind of my witchcraft angle, and the third one is the Freemasons. So they're very different, but there's so much to be said about the Templars. But back to you.
Yeah. It's a fascinating story. And I think that you're right, probably going down the line of where I like to study. I definitely find, the esotericism of them very interesting, the secret that they kept. And I mean, now we know a lot more, it's not quite as taboo, not to say all the secrets are spilled, but I mean, back then this was not a good idea, right?
Well, this is where, the second book is called Downfall of the Templars. And I think that's where, people get really, their curiosity gets piqued. Why were the Templars destroyed? This holy order of warriors for 200 years. The whole of Europe was told these are the warriors for Christ, and they're doing great stuff in the Holy Land. And then suddenly in 1307, everybody's told, oh yeah, by the way, they're Diabolists, they're sorcerers, they're heretics and so on, and then they're crushed in the most appalling way. And one of the things that I'm exploring is, because this is 1307, and then from the 1400s for about 300 years, as you know, there was the witchcraft mania, the witch trials, which of course jumped to North America, with the Salem and so on. And if you look at the trials of the Templars in the early 1300s, a lot of the things they were accused of, spitting on crosses, kissing each other on the backside, that's very witchcraft. It's called the osculum infamy, kissing the devil on the backside, and the kind of all the kind of beliefs, secret beliefs and so on. It starts to look like a witch trial. And also, actually, the King of France, who went after them, he actually had a bunch of women on trial as witches at the time. Oh. He was also accusing a bishop of having killed the queen using potions and spells. And he was also trying to put a dead pope on trial, have him dug up and put on trial for diabolism. So I think there's a lot of witchcraft connections to the Knights Templar, which I explore.
How fascinating. I love this. This is coming out, you said, in November, right?
That's out in November. And I think, because people normally say, oh, well, the Templars were crushed because of the money. The King of France just wanted their money. And they were very good at raising money because they needed money to fight the wars in the Holy Land. But there's got to be more to it than that, because other orders of knights carried on. The Knights Hospitaller continued. It's the Templars that are crushed, in a really ferocious way. Something was amiss with the Templars, And right. So I look at this possibility that one of the reasons is that the king genuinely believed they were engaging in witchcraft, in diabolism. They were accused of worshipping a demon, as you know, called Baphomet, which, we think about this horned goat type thing, but that was a later image. But they were supposed to be worshipping this head that spoke to them in their ceremonies, that gave them instructions. So, yeah, look, this is the Middle Ages. People believe this stuff,
Do you think it was the head of John the Baptist?
Well, that is one theory, and I've seen 3 or 4 heads of John the Baptist, around Europe. There's one in Damascus. There's I think 1 or 2 in Rome, and I've seen so many bits of his skull in Portugal. His head must have been this big, But he gets the head of John the Baptist was a very popular holy relic, And this whole theory about, were the Templars digging for these holy relics in Jerusalem? Were they looking for them under the Temple Mount? That's another thing, of course, the Templars are accused of, looking for sacred relics, the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail, all this kind of thing.
Yes. And with John the Baptist, they even, postulate, and I don't know if the Templars have been nailed for this excessively or if it's just rumor, but there's another Christ. I mean, some people say John the Baptist was the Christ, right? And there's like this little, thing.
Well, this is something, I read about this. There's basically, there are people in the Middle Ages, but actually there's some still now in Iraq and Syria who believed that actually John the Baptist was the Messiah, not Jesus. And so some people have suspected that the Templars were influenced by this. They call it Johannite, a Johannite version of Christianity. And if you read the Bible, actually, especially the Gospel of Mark, John the Baptist doesn't look pleased to see Jesus, to put it mildly. And you get this feeling that Jesus may have been a rival sect, and he'd basically come along to try and steal John the Baptist's members, and there's definitely, you get the feeling Christians had to work hard to prove that John the Baptist really did believe in Jesus. You get this whole thing about he recognizes Jesus as a fetus from his mother's womb. I mean, please, so
leapt, right? It leapt, yeah.
It leapt. So I think they're trying rather hard here to try and prove this to us. So yeah, this is the idea that there were these Johannite Christians, that the Templars may have been Johannites, or they may have been Gnostics, another form of, forbidden, banned Christianity, this belief in an evil God and a good God. And so this idea that the Templars knew, they picked up some kind of wisdom in the East that posed a threat to the church, basically.
Right. And it's fascinating. I mean, if you study this, like this kind of a thing with the, evil and good, and it goes to Abraxas, right? Like, and even older than that, like we see these things pop up, Abraxas coins and all this stuff, and they use the seal of Abraxas, right? I think this might have got them in a little bit of hot water.
Yeah, well, there's people who've said, and this then taps into this idea, of course, that's very popular, that the Templars were kind of set up by a pre-existing organization. And then, of course, we get into the whole territory of the the Priory of Sion, or this other theory about this group of families called the Rex Deus. So there's supposed to be this group of families that go right back to the high priests in Jerusalem. Obviously, a lot of mainstream historians, most mainstream historians do not accept this. They have no time for this. But there is this idea, though, that the Templars were kind of set up as the military wing of a pre-existing organization. And most of the theories are that these organizations were there to protect the bloodline of Jesus Christ, sometimes called the Desposini, the kind of descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and to protect them from the Catholic Church, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, the problem with that theory is, how do you square it with the fact that the church showered privileges on the Templars, seemed to protect the Templars, but then on the other hand, something goes wrong in that church-Templar relationship, where the church then turns on the Templars. So, of course, it's very hard to figure out what was happening. Why did the church seem to love the Templars at one stage, and then they become public enemy number one?
Right. And this Rex Deus has been kind of hot lately. But I'm interested in it for a different reason. I don't know if you know this, but Joseph Smith himself said he was the perfect combination, because he was from these Rex Deus lines, that he was actually part tribe of Manasseh and part tribe of Ephraim. And for the Mormons, Ephraim is Mary and Manasseh is Jesus, and that he was the perfect combination. And that's why, Crowley mentions him as a moon child. Like, this gets really weird, right? Like, but he literally says he is that Mormons are this bloodline. And I don't know what to do with that.
Well, one thing that, obviously I know a lot of Christians will say, oh, Mormons, that this is all made up and so on. But in a way, the Mormons are no different to a lot of Christian sects that, Christianity didn't crystallize around the beliefs that most Christians have today until, 300-400 years after Christ died. And in the East, there were still lots of Christians who had very different views to Roman Catholics, for example, who were in the East at the time the Templars were crusading there. I'll give you an example. the Crusades weren't just fought in the Holy Land; they were also fought in what's now Spain and Portugal. And in the 12th century, the Crusades had to take the city of Lisbon, and Lisbon in Portugal, it's now the capital of Portugal, was an Arab city called Al-Lisbona. So the Crusaders come, they take the city of Al-Lisbona, and the Crusaders basically, they loot the place, they kill a lot of people. And it's a city that has Jews, it has a lot of Muslims, but it also has these Eastern Christians. And, there's a bishop who comes forward to the Crusaders and he says, I'm the Bishop of Lisbon. And they cut his throat. And they said, no, you're not a Christian. You're not our idea of a Christian. And they put one of their own, this knight, they install him as the first Bishop of Lisbon, because they say the form of Christianity that's been here so far, that's not what we call Christianity. So, Christians, Roman Catholics in particular, did not tolerate other forms of Christianity. And there was the Eastern Orthodox, but in the Middle East, you had everything, Nestorians, Johannites, all sorts of types of Christians. So Mormons, in a way, they're kind of picking up on Christian beliefs that may not be accepted by mainstream Protestant or Roman Catholics, obviously, but might actually align with other forms of Christianity that...
Yeah. I think it does. I actually think they would be better off. As an ex-Mormon, I will say this. I think they would be better off if they would actually tell the truth of what they truly believe. And I think that really, the dichotomy of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young is half the problem, because then he dies and they kind of hide this magic, right? Just like the Roman Catholic Church, because the whole reason why they didn't want anybody to do Christian mysticism, basically, right? That's not for the uninitiated. We've got this, initiated sect. This is private things we do. And this is the uninitiated for the masses. And you stay over there. And the Mormons do the same, with their temple rites and whatnot. But yeah.
One of the things about at the time that the Templars are crushed, the Catholic Church has become very powerful. The Pope has become incredibly powerful. The Pope can tell kings and princes what to do. And if they don't do it, he excommunicates them. But there's a lot of rebellion against this, a lot of pushback. And there's a lot of what they call heresies that form, like the Waldensians and the Cathars. In fact, the Catholic Church has to mount a full-blown crusade. While it's crusading against the Muslims in the East, it has to mount a full-blown crusade against a bunch of Christians called the Cathars, because they're Gnostics, because they are basically rejecting the authority of the Pope. And that's in France. And they're literally they're massacring other Christians in France while they're in the Middle East, fighting Muslims. And I think what happens is that the Catholic Church isn't necessarily winning over everybody. There's a lot of people in the Middle Ages saying, well, maybe these heretics have got a point. I don't like the look of these bishops going around with jewels and living in golden palaces and these huge cathedrals. What's this got to do with Jesus, So what the Catholic Church does, it kind of sexes up the charges against heretics. It's no longer good enough to say, you are a heretic because you disagree with church teaching. No, what they start to say is, you are a heretic because you're in league with the devil. You are engaging in black magic. You are working with Satanism, and they start to mix in this whole idea of witches and sorcerers and necromancers, which previously the church wasn't really that into. They thought, oh, that's superstition. We reject that. But then they start mixing it in. And by the time the Templars are put on trial, they're not just being accused of being heretics. They're being accused of being diabolists, of being in league with the devil, all this sort of thing. And that, of course, is propaganda. It's designed to kind of wipe out any form of Christianity that the church doesn't like by, making it really scary, by saying,
right.
These Christians who are not in line with the Pope, they're in league with demons.
Burn them. Yeah, like that's scary.
Burn 'em,
yeah. Oh, that's so terrifying. And you did mention Salem. And again, this happens. And I dare say, the Mormons are always in history. It's really weird. And people always think I'm making things bigger. But I'm like, look, I'm just finding things where I'm searching other things, right? Like, so Salem, for example, and I don't know if you know this, Captain Samuel Smith was Joseph Smith's great grandpa, and his father wasn't a captain, but just Samuel Smith. And he was involved in the Inquisition, and actually he was the sealing of the death for Mary Easty. And he was born in 1666. And this all happened. I can't remember which year she was hung, but, she said, I am innocent. Like, I did not do this. And 132 years later, on the same night, that is when Joseph Smith sees Moroni and gets these plates, So it gets weird. And you can't help but wonder, because of what we know in that time, is the people that were actually accusing were oftentimes the alchemists and people practicing things that would be considered witchcraft, right? Like, I mean, maybe they weren't, but this is, I don't know if you've seen the Smith family parchments, but they knew some things, is what I'm saying.
Well, there's one of the popes at the time of the Templar trials, actually just after, when Pope Clement dies, it's a pope called Pope John. And, he genuinely believes that people are coming into the papal palace with kind of voodoo dolls shaped as him to try and kill him.
Oh, man.
But, one of the successor popes is actually, he's studying in his library, and the ceiling falls in on his head. It's a new library. Ceiling falls in and kills him. And people say the reason he's killed is because he's a diabolist. He's engaging in, and he's doing forbidden stuff. So at the same time that they are, the popes are crushing people for being necromancers and sorcerers, they're also engaging in it themselves, as you kind of intimate that these accusers are up to the same thing. But they need to kind of deflect, by accusing other people of being, what they are.
Right. Because it's back to uninitiated. These are secret teachings. And I think the secrets get us into trouble, and every time we see these things, like, okay, the skull and bones that the Templars flew, right? That was their thing. And then we get into Skull and Bones, the society, which the Mormons helped start. And it gets weird again. And I'm like, this is such a strange, like, that's literally Ezra Taft Benson. You catch that Taft in the middle, right? He's one of the prophets, but this is his family. And they say, no, it's not. And then you look at this is how I found it. Look at the genealogy. These people are all from the same exact area, and they're not related with the same exact last name. You know what? So I'm like, no, they gotta be, like, this is the same area. This is all obfuscated. Like, they make it, they're not from Topsfield, Massachusetts, and that's not Salem. And, they're from New York, and they just hide. And I think it's not serving, right? Like, it's better to just say, yep, that happened. And that's like why blah, blah, blah. Like these Smith family parchments that came out was like a nail in the coffin. And then they are digging up, they dug up Joseph and his brother and made coffin canes out of the wood soaked in blood and took their hair and put it in knobs. And you're telling me they're not into some weird stuff? Like, I'm like, sure. And again, same with these other people, right? Like, it's all hidden. It's like this weird undertone. And I think that's what causes a lot of problems. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, and when you talk about are these different kind of groups of heretics basically interrelated to each other? Because, a lot of the early Templars come from the Champagne region of France, but they come from, that kind of eastern southern part of France. And a lot of people have said, where they related to some of the Cathars, for example, where there are ties of blood to some of these heretics, which means that, the Templars, did they defend the Cathars? They certainly don't seem to have fought them. They were too busy in the Holy Land, but maybe they just didn't want to fight them because they were their kin, they were related to them. And, I think it's very interesting to know, because I don't think these people existed separate from each other. They were neighbors, and how were they all influencing each other? But, one thing, it's interesting, you mentioned Freemasons kind of earlier on, or the Masonic.
Yes, Martinism. Yeah. And it's similar, both. Yeah.
Yeah, and you got to remember as well that what Freemasonry really comes out in the 18th century, so that's like 400 years after the Templars are crushed. But people don't seem to realize that the Inquisition still existed in the 1700s. In fact, existed right into the 1800s. And I was just writing about a guy called Count Cagliostro.
Oh, he's a Martinist. This is who helped. This is okay. So yeah,
And
he's the one that helped discover it with the other two.
yeah, and what happens to him?
Yeah, it's not good.
He's arrested by the Inquisition. He tries to he does a really stupid thing. He tries to set up a Freemason lodge in Rome when the popes actually still rule the whole city. So he gets arrested, he gets put on trial. He's facing actually being executed, and they commute it to a life sentence. But he's put into a dried cistern. Have you ever seen Silence of the Lambs? It's like hole that the guy puts the women into.
Oh
There's no
no.
windows. It's a dried out cistern, and he's left there for 3, 4, 5 years until he dies. Because the church wants to make an example that Freemasonry, the secret society that they can't control. So they've still got the same attitude to Masons that they had to the Templars. But yeah, So you're a fan of Count Cagliostro?
So Cagliostro and these other two, I'm trying to think of the name right now, but they're in it all together. They're the ones that form Martinism or the Mizraim rites, so same thing. Martinist is just
Memphis and Mizraim, yeah.
Yes. And so of course I started studying other esoteric people like Steiner and all these things, and it bangs into it every single time almost. I mean, he was a Martinist, and nothing bad about Martinism per se. I'm not a judger of like what people choose to do. I just don't like lying about things. But because I went to the temple and I did all these things and I became a Freemason and I didn't know what one was, right? And so that's unfair. You should know, even if you don't know all the secrets. When you become a Freemason, you're going to go through some levels and they're going to hoodwink you. But we don't know that as Mormons. We just think this is going to get us to heaven, and it doesn't have anything to do with it. And which is funny to me now. Now I'm over it. But I always tell people, they say, why don't you just leave it alone? And I'm like, look, I feel like if you want to be a Satanist, you want to be a magician, you want to be a Mormon, you want to be a Catholic, I don't care what people want to do. But at the end of the day, they should at least know what water they're getting into before they jump, right? So I started studying all these guys, and I didn't even know what any of this was. I just started going down rabbit holes, and I thought I was going to figure some stuff out. One thing about Freemasonry, you're never going to figure it out. It's much.
I mean, the third book I'm doing on the Templars is all about Freemasonry. I'm not a Freemason myself. I feel I have to say that. I did get asked that, but Count Cagliostro is kind of worth just doing a little detour on him, because he's such those 18th century characters they're just incredible. But it's quite likely he wasn't a count. He's born in Sicily, and he and his wife, they basically call themselves the Count and Countess Cagliostro, and they behave like aristocrats, and people believe that they're aristocrats. And in London, he comes to London, he joins the Freemasons, but he's disappointed by what he sees in the Freemasons. He thinks it's just like a social club with silly rituals, and he's quite serious about combining elements of Hermeticism, but particularly ancient Egypt. He wants to combine the rites of ancient Egypt, and it's called actually Egyptian Freemasonry is one of the terms used. And he establishes, as you say, this rite of Memphis and the rite of Mizraim. And the idea is to kind of like tap into what's an already, a lot of people, including Belzoni, who's one of the great archaeologists who discovers one of the pyramids in Egypt, or goes into one of the pyramids in Egypt, discovers the tomb of the pharaoh Seti. I saw the sarcophagus here in London last week, which he brought, and you can still see Belzoni. He scratched.
That's cool.
And but Belzoni, he believed that the pyramids were Masonic temples, and he believed that the tombs were places where Masonic rites were carried out. And Count Cagliostro, he knew about Belzoni's views, and he believed that as well. He believed that Freemasonry went right back into ancient Egypt. And of course, if Freemasonry went right back to ancient Egypt, so did the Knights Templar and everything that they believed as well. So a lot of Masons totally convinced that they mixed it with Christianity as well, because they connected it to Moses, of course, being a prince of Egypt. And you may know the obelisk in New York, the obelisk in New York and the obelisk in London, which are both wrongly called Cleopatra's Needles, because they're actually way older than Cleopatra. They're about 1,000 years older than Cleopatra. The one in New York, this is Central Park, and the one in London, which is by the River Thames, they both sat in the same place originally in ancient Egypt in front of a temple, and they were both brought back by Freemasons. And the Freemasons were convinced that there were Masonic secrets on those needles. That's why they wanted them, back in the West, so they could obviously own them and take a closer look at them and so on. So there's a
They were at a Baal temple, right? Weren't they from a Baal temple? Yes, okay, I thought so.
Yeah. And people say that's where Moses received his education, and and so on and so forth. So it's and there's, when the one was put up in Central Park, there was a massive. I actually looked at the newspapers from the time. Thousands of Freemasons marched down Fifth Avenue, including Masonic Templars. Because there's that connection between the Knights Templar.
Wow.
And they got there, and the Grand Master actually was the person who laid the foundation stone, and they put corn and wine and oil onto the foundation stone and Masonic symbols, and then they put the needle on top of it. So,
wow.
Underneath that needle is a load of Masonic stuff.
Right. Yeah. And it makes sense. I mean, and the other guy that helped was Jean-Claude Martin, I think, and he got scared. I think what happened with him is, look, I'm a believer of things work. Magic, look, they would have stopped this a long time ago if it never worked, because it's not just abracadabra and pull it out of a hat. That word has a lot of different meanings, but like, we see this and it's been made to be almost a joke, I guess. And I don't think it's a joke. Like, I think this very much works, even down to Damien Eccles talking about, getting the HGA and all these different things, their holy guardian angels. And I think really this is, it always goes back to Egypt. It really, really does. And these things, like you said, they can mix and make their own brand per se, but isn't that Freemasonry anyway? They're all challenged.
Completely.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course, the other thing that I'm looking at as well is, obviously the Templars were based in Jerusalem and on what they thought was the Temple of Solomon. I mean, the most sacred place to the Jews. And of course, the Temple of Solomon was destroyed by the Babylonians. They built another temple that was destroyed by the Romans. And in the course of all that, the Ark of the Covenant, which held the Ten Commandments, that went missing. It's never been seen again. And a lot of other kind of holy relics. And, the Freemasons believe that because the temple was built on something called Mount Moriah, which was the site of, Christians believe it was the site of the crucifixion, the burial, the resurrection, and so on. Muslims believe it's where Muhammad ascended into heaven for, the night journey, as they call it. And Jews believed it's where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac, Mount Moriah. Now, Freemasons believe that a prophet called Enoch dug a 9-vaulted chamber underneath Mount Moriah. And in the lowest vault, in the 9th vault, he put a golden triangle with the name of God on it, encased in a marble, in a marble kind of a rectangle square. So you've got a lot going on the Temple Mount.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Sacred to all the Abrahamic religions. Plus, the Masons think there's a load of chambers down there. Plus, people think that the reason the Templars based themselves there is because they were digging for holy relics. And plus, from the 19th century, you get Freemason archaeologists turning up, also digging, looking for stuff.
Right, right.
There's a lot of digging going on in Jerusalem. Everybody's looking for secrets. The question is, did the Templars find something? That's what people, of course, want to know. Did they find the Ark of the Covenant? Did they find the Holy Grail? Did they find the head of John the Baptist? I mean, all those theories are out there. And did that make them a threat to the church? That's another theory, of course, as you know, that's out there.
Oh, yeah. I there's only one reason why the church wouldn't back them after backing them. And that might be, for me, in my mind, is they got what they wanted, right? Like they like, he literally was there right before Friday the 13th. The leader of the Templars went to talk to the Pope to defend himself, right? And put an end to all these accusations. Did he give up something at that time that was so important, right? Because surely that would change the world at that time for him. I don't know.
Well, I mean, one thing we can say about, when they're arrested, it's done in utmost secrecy. So in September 1307, these arrest warrants are circulated. It's only in France, by the way. They're circulated around France, and it's the king actually who leads this. It's not the Pope. The Pope, though, is in exile in what's now France at the time, and he's a bit bullied basically by the king. But the king leads this, and I think he really thinks that the Templars are kind of demonic or whatever. But when the arrest warrants are served and there's this huge dawn raid on the Templars, they are surprised. They're really not expecting it. I mean, some people have a theory that some of the Templars did know what was about to happen and that they took their treasure down to the port of La Rochelle and they managed to get out, possibly to Scotland. Some people say to Portugal. The Scotland thing, of course, is then that they went to Scotland. They were protected by Robert the Bruce, the King of Scotland, who had been excommunicated by the church, and that they were also protected by a family called the Sinclairs, and that the Sinclairs, who were a kind of Viking Norman family, most families up there had Viking and Saxon and Norman connections, and that family took them along old Viking trade routes, basically to North America, to Nova Scotia, and that's where they buried their treasure, and that's why we have the Curse of Oak Island, of course.
Yes, so fascinating. Yeah, so fascinating. I mean, I definitely, and then we get into, okay, people always say, well, why would they do this? That's weird. This is weird. And people are like, oh, well, royal people were doing weird stuff. They were going traveling. Okay, but they didn't just go missing. And with my family member that ends up in this, Henry Stuart Talbot or Talbot Stuart, I can't remember which way it goes, but he is supposedly this illegitimate kid, of the king. And he makes the presents and he takes off and he never goes back and he becomes a poor Mormon. And the money is not there. Like they just take off, right? They're gone and they don't care that they're poor. And then they became these Mormons right before they left England. This was, and then you always have to question when you see all these connections, like, okay, we've got Mormons up in Nova Scotia and they're marrying, the Micmac and encouraged to, and there's all these traces of these things. And people will say, oh, that's with every family. Yeah. Well, but some of this matters when you're talking about bloodlines, and they say, well, it doesn't matter. And nobody has the right to rule, but it does matter if they believe in this divine right to rule, right? Or even Jesus's bloodline. What were they hiding? I mean, and then there's that weird Marie Antoinette story with her kid possibly coming over here. And that's my other relative, but it's weird. Yeah. Cause if you're related to one, like you're just related to all of it.
And you mentioned there the Micmac, which is kind of an interesting angle, because if we believe that the Templars were taken by the Sinclair family to Nova Scotia, the story that some people have told is that they then met this kind of Native American tribe, which still exists, called the Micmac. And on their flag today, there is still a crucifix. It's on its side, but there's still a crucifix on their flag, which some people have said, well, what's that doing there? Basically, does that prove that they met the Templars? And then I suppose it'd be quite interesting if you do believe that the Templars came over with the Sinclairs, that they never went back. Did they intermarry? What happened? And did they share some kind of knowledge with the local people? And then, of course, that kind of plays into, well, how might that link to Mormonism? How might that link to American Freemasonry? And people
how it got here. Yeah. And here's the thing that we can't deny, as I've talked to a lot of Aboriginal people there, the Micmac people have been first, were introduced to the Beothuk and they wiped them out completely. And then after that, the Micmac became very, I will say possibly obedient for life, because they became Catholic, and all of their children for generation upon generation, they're not just one or two named Mary. All of them were named Mary and all of them were named Joseph in tons of like just years and years and years. And it's not just one, like everyone in the town is named Mary and Joseph for a while. And they were kind of forced into, from what I'm hearing from people, into, this, and their traditions, their oral traditions are lining up, like this happened and this happened, and these people are popping up. So it's just so weird and bizarre that we just hide all this history, fascinating history. Like they just want to put it in the ground,
And then, of course, talking of putting in the ground, of course, there's the whole idea. The whole idea that the Templars, may have buried even the Holy Grail at Oak Island. And I do think the story of the money pit, Oak Island, where, it's said the Templars buried, and people have been trying to dig this pit up for, a long, there seem to be booby traps in it and so on that stop people digging it up. But there's also kind of a connection to the 9 vaults of Enoch on Mount Moriah, because when you read the description of the money pit, it has a kind of resonance with that kind of idea of multiple layers. And it is said that there was a stone found there with a strange inscription on it that has now very enigmatically gone missing, unfortunately.
Oh, no.
But I still think there's a kind of an Enoch type, connection to that story. I mean, some people say that the Templars...
Is that the Kensington stone? Is that
the Kensington rune stone, which is a separate thing. That's a kind of...
Okay.
Now, as I understand it, that is was found by Swedish Americans, and that's kind of linked to the idea that that Europeans were in the Midwest basically long before Christopher Columbus. I mean, by the way, Christopher Columbus, it's often said, if the Templars got to America with the Sinclairs in the 1300s or early 1400s, that of course means they were the first people there. That means Christopher Columbus is out of the frame. And of course, people say the proof for this is that in Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, there's these carvings on the wall that look like maize and aloe vera and are basically North American plants. And how could those carvings be on the walls of Rosslyn Chapel if, Christopher Columbus was the first person there? And, a lot of people, I was at Rosslyn Chapel last year, really popular. A lot of people go there.
There's like a demon there, right? Too? Like a weird...
There's all sorts of There's even the Holy Grail is supposed to be buried under the nave. But Christopher Columbus as well, by the way, is also said to have a Templar connection because, there's rumours as well that he married into maybe a Portuguese Templar family. In Portugal, they think he was Portuguese, not Italian. Some people think he was Polish. Some people think he was Scottish, by the way. But there's all kind of rumored Templar connections with Columbus as well. So he gets
fascinating. Yeah, I knew about Rosslyn Chapel, but I didn't know he was rumored all these different, possible things. And that's actually really fascinating because it can open up a lot of lines, right? Like people always say, well, can't be that, can't be this. It's all Scottish Rite. I'm like, look, these things existed so long before Scottish Rite. Like we said, this has been back to Egypt. Like you said, this is like really old and people don't always, they just throw that at it and say, that fits, go on with your life. And I'm like, no, that doesn't fit.
Well, at Rosslyn Chapel, if you go down there's a kind of like an underground, they don't call it crypt, it's a sacristy. And it's actually older than the main chapel. But on the wall, there's a kind of like, it's often people say it's just the mark of stonemasons, the original masons. It kind of looks like a 1970s electricity pylon with a little star. And some people say that this is actually a map of showing the direction to North America, and that star is a reference to the evening star, the morning star. Get it the wrong way around. There's also a carving on the wall in the church that it's very worn. Some people say it's just Christ and the 2 thieves on the cross, but some people argue that it's actually Jacques de Molay being burned. At the stake, the last Grand Master is being burned. So, but there's a lot of strange, and it's a very enigmatic place. I mean, if you get to visit, it's a great,
fascinating. I would love to do that. Strange. I made it to France and I made it to Italy, but I haven't made it. We were going to do the thing that goes under the channel to come from France, and they were on strike. They were on strike that day. We couldn't come.
French are always on strike. Autumn. Never go in autumn because they're always on strike in autumn. It's.
I think it was maybe autumn. Yeah, we were trying to get there and we couldn't get there. I was so disappointed.
So it's a national tradition. Of course, Paris has loads of Masonic history.
Yeah. Oh, and it's fascinating.
If you actually try to find the spot where Jacques de Molay was burned, it's on an island in the middle of the River Seine. they really seem to hide it away. You have to look for it as a plaque, but you really have to kind of look up under the bridge to find it. Like there's still
Oh,
something they don't quite want to still admit happened. This is where Jacques de Molay was literally burned to death.
oh,
And he's an old man. It was an awful thing to do to a man in his 70s, who didn't
ugh.
expect. But like you say, the Pope and the King, the powers that be came for the Templars, and they weren't going to. And on one occasion in 1310, they actually burned 50 Templars at once. I mean, I can't imagine what
Oh,
spectacle
wow.
that was.
Ugh. That
So
I,
it's
to be burned alive seems just awful. Although the hole in the ground, pretty bad too. But I think I'd take that over being. I don't know. One's faster. I don't know.
well,
They're so creative.
you
Yeah.
know the story as well. 'Cause I think it's a very. I mean, unless sometimes they garroted you first, or they, put a bit of gunpowder underneath your neck so your head blew off. But I mean, sometimes you were just left to burn to death, and it was deliberately because this is heresy. It's the worst thing in the Middle Ages that you could do. And the whole point about burning you, of course, is people. That means you can't come back. Basically, you don't
Right.
rise on Judgment Day. People were not supposed to be cremated in the Christian church at that time. Cremating you was basically destroying you, body and soul, for all eternity. So it's a humiliating way to die. And
Especially their head, right? Because the head is where, so this is like super important for people that don't know, but the head is like where everything is kind of stored, I guess. It's like the most important part for coming back, I guess, is what I've read or something. So I don't know. You heard anything about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, and you're definitely not coming back when your head's when your
Yeah.
head's gone. And obviously, heads are well. I mean, relics are a big thing. Like you say, the head of John the Baptist. Some people even claim the Templars found the head of Jesus Christ. Bit unlikely because he did ascend to heaven. I think he did it with his head. But
I would take my head.
I think he might have shocked his father if he turned up without his head. But yeah. But there are all sorts, and of course, there's a theory that the Templars also had the Shroud of Turin, what we call the Shroud of Turin now that they had. I did a documentary earlier this year. It was actually for German TV where, we looked at this theory that the Templars, in the year 1204 during the Fourth Crusade, a Christian army actually sacked the city of Constantinople, which was a Christian city, but a different kind of Christian. They were Eastern Orthodox.
Oh,
So the Catholic Crusaders sacked Constantinople and they stole, and Constantinople had loads of holy relics, which were then taken to the West. They had everything. They even had the loaves and fishes from that miracle and
oh,
table from the Last Supper and all sorts. And one of the theories is that the Templars basically took the Shroud of Jesus and then they held it in France and then eventually it ended up in Turin, where it's now the Shroud of Turin. That's argued about. Not everybody accepts that, but there is this idea that for about 150 years, the Templars actually owned the Shroud of Jesus.
oh, wow. And that would make sense. I mean, that would really make some people mad if you're the Pope, I suppose. If you went in
Yeah. I mean,
and,
what are you doing with that shroud?
you
Because
bring that here. Yeah.
well, yeah, exactly. I mean, the Pope expected to have the best relics. I mean, the idea of other people having relics that were especially something linked to Jesus himself. That is really offensive to the popes.
So maybe he gave it back when he went to plead his innocence, right? And then, they don't need you anymore.
Well, and we know that there were tough negotiations between the Pope and the Templars. In fact, the Pope even said to the Templars, "I want you to merge with the Hospitallers." And we know Jacques de Molay said, "No, I will not do that. I want the Templar order to remain totally separate. This order has a specific mission, and it does not merge with anybody else. Just because you want to cut costs, we're not going to do that." And some people believe, that's another reason that suspicion rose against the Templars. Why is it that they want to remain so secretive? They want to remain their own organization. And they then, of course, got brutally suppressed.
Yeah, definitely suppressed. I mean, I see the banking behind it and I get what they're saying. Like, okay, this money thing's important, but we always know, look, with money, I don't know that they would have gone that far. It had to be more, in my opinion. I don't know. for that kind of brutality.
They were good at making money, because they ran a kind of banking check system. People could actually take out money because the Templars had this network of what they call commanderies, preceptories all over Europe. And they were like little agri-businesses. They were making money from, I don't know, sheep, cows, butter, milk. A lot of the ordinary Templars who went knights were basically selling produce in the local market, but all that money was funneled to the knights in the Holy Land. But they were a very effective money-making machine. They lent money as well, which was supposed to be illegal, but somehow they got around that because you weren't supposed to earn interest if you were a Christian. So they lent money. They were engaged in all sorts of money-making ruses. But like you say, it just can't come down to that because the king could have walked in and just helped himself to some of the money. He didn't need to go to that extent. And that trial, of the Templars drags on for 5 years, and there's a lot of bloodshed. And by the way, you got to remember Jacques de Molay, he thought he was on good terms with the king. The day before he was arrested, he was a pallbearer at the king's, I think it was his sister-in-law, carrying the coffin. He thought, I am part of the family. I'm a friend of the king. And he didn't know that the king was plotting to absolutely destroy him. The next day he's in chains, and the torture, by the way, the Templars was so horrific. There's a story of one Templar who was, they covered his feet in goose fat or something, set them on fire. And when he turned up in court, he actually brought his foot bones out and said, "This is what you lot did to me," and slapped them on the table.
Oh my goodness.
Why that brutality? Why was that?
By then they had the money, right? Like if you arrest everyone, you've got all the money. So if it's about money, make up a story of I feel bad and let's give them leniency and let them go. But that's not what they did. Yeah.
But even other kings in Europe, the King of England, actually at the time, Edward II, the King of Castile, they said, "What's wrong with the King of France? Why has he gone so mad? What is, they could see the money angle, but they just couldn't figure out this fury that was being unleashed against
torture.
The Templars. Eventually, and by the way, in England, for example, they did arrest the Templars because the Pope told them to, but they refused to torture them. They wouldn't go the whole hog. They didn't know why they were being forced to do this, while the Pope was saying, every Christian must turn on the Templars. But, everybody went along with it. But most people didn't want to torture them. They didn't want to torture. They just thought it was stuck in their throat. They thought these guys are good guys, But
like you said, even if they didn't, the sheer brutality of it. If you're a good king, you kind of don't want to be involved in that, right? Like, what if they're innocent? Yeah. So,
well, I guess one angle we should look at is the Nazis, shouldn't we? Because everybody's obsessed with the Nazis, aren't they? The Nazis, of course, did actually obsess about the Templars, and they sent this archaeologist, this poor guy called Otto Rahn, Rahn, if you want to look him up, and he was sent on a mission to find the Holy Grail and to find the trail of the Templars. And he went all over Europe. He went up to Iceland.
The Grail, right? The Grail Society?
The Grail,
okay.
Thule Society was the kind of the occult society. And they, the Nazis really believed this stuff. And they thought, if we can find the Grail, better if we can find the Ark of the Covenant. Oh, weapon of mass destruction. You know this from your Indiana Jones, of course.
Yeah.
They were looking for this stuff for real. Indiana Jones is actually based on this real quest. And they thought they could tap into this magic. They could tap into
I think they might have. Like, look at how advanced they were on us, right? Like on everyone, not just us. Fascinating because about the castle, like where they had everything, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but
Babelsberg.
Yeah, and they were shipping out all the esoteric stuff to Russia because on trains, and they knew not to keep it there because it was they were coming for them. But for everything that you could save, like, oh, this is so important, gold or money. No, what are they shipping out? Books and relics and all this stuff, that they've collected, and here they are, heads and tails above us. And what do? We take them here, right? Operation Paperclip, and have some fun times. And Werner von Braun was very good friends with Mormons. He was in a Mormon theological film that is like provable, like all this weird stuff. And the Mormons are very supportive of the Nazi regime. They don't like to bring this up, but they're very much of that same brotherhood, right? The Great White Brotherhood is very popular for Mormons for a very long time, right? This whole, you know, racial purity and root race. They're not going to tell anybody this, but that's the way it was. I mean,
well, of course, the SS had a special division, the Ananeb, and its thing was to actually kind of develop these race theories. I'm sure they borrowed from all kinds of religions and creeds, and they. I mean, I found out the other day. I never really looked into this very much, but they had, you know, the English actually used a coven of witches to kind of create. They called it a cone of power to try and stop German bombs landing on England. And the story was that the Nazis had their own coven of witches doing the exact opposite, so repelling bombs as well. But and apparently
that's great.
Disney movie Bed Knobs and Broomsticks partly based on this. So you know, the English coven of witches. You know,
wow.
the English witch trying to repel the Nazis. So you know, there was all this weird occult stuff, and it is linked to the Templars. And of course, the Nazis, by the way, hated the Freemasons as well, as you know. Mussolini did, for whatever reason. But they were obsessed with the Templars, and they thought that the Templars and the Cathars were part of this Aryan, you know, race, and that Jesus was an Aryan. Oh God, yeah,
with red hair, nonetheless.
All that jazz, yeah. So,
wasn't it a different name too for him, like a different Jesus? I think that wasn't this like a part of it. I can't remember. The redheaded Jesus, that was a different Jesus. I can't remember.
Oh right, because I knew they tried to have an Aryan Christianity.
Yes.
They tried to have their own version of Christianity, their own Bible and so on, and that didn't really wash. But I mean, it was difficult. It's a tough sell because they were trying to basically take Jesus out of Judaism for, you know, for obvious ideological reasons. But that didn't work out too well. So Magick obviously didn't work for the Nazis because they lost the Second World War and they all got put on trial at the end. So they a bit like
English witches were better, right?
Oh, I think those English witches were formidable. You know, there's some around here where I live in London, so yeah.
I mean, real ones, or, you know, those kind of girls.
We've got some real ones
trying
around
to run.
here. We've got some real ones around here.
Oh, that's funny. Well, and I think that this stuff, like, you know, when we get into esoterics or hermeticism or, you know, any of the stuff that they really bury underground, like people are so fussy about it. It was like the first satanic panic, right? Like this is like what happens is everything just goes underground. But here we are and I don't think that English or French are quite as bad as Americans. Americans are like, none of it's real. Nothing is real. None of that's anything. And I think that's a real disservice to things because if you're a Christian, you should probably know about the other side of things so you can teach your kids and teach people like, oh, you might not want to fall into this, right? Like this could be serious or that could be serious, or yes, you might get power, but it comes at a cost or whatever, but they don't, right? It's just like, nope, none of that's real. Nope. Bye. Burn them all. Yeah. What?
I mean, I think it's interesting thing you call it the first satanic panic, because I think in some ways that's a good, I might use that in the book actually, but I think that is actually
a
second book, yeah. But I think that's a good way of describing what they're trying to do. Is they're trying to whip up fear when they put the Templars on trial. They're trying to whip up this kind of mania, and of course I think it does eventually become the witchcraft mania, that because actually a lot of the people who are arrested early on as witches were male as well as female. It becomes more female later on. Women really get it in the neck later on, but it does start with men and women, you know, being arrested. And I think the Templars were basically treated as witches, and of course witches were burned, you know, because they're heretics and they're in league with Satan. I mean, what else is going to happen to them? You're not going to give them a nice execution. You're going to give them the worst possible execution. You know, it's almost like saying as well to the devil, if you go on, devil, save them if you can. You know, it's a kind of provocation. You know,
yeah, you're over the fire. Go get them. You know, help them out. Right? Ugh, terrible. I can't imagine being burned. It would just be that's not a good one at all. Like, but the fact that they did this to people and people were so afraid afterward it shows why you would go underground, right? You're never going to talk about this again. Like if your grandma taught you, or what if you happen to be a clairvoyant by nature? Because we know in Christianity too, like true blue Christianity, like no woo woo, no weird stuff. Like there are people that are mystical still that have gifts, right? That are naturally just, I mean, because they have them. And then so you get this. And I mean, I would never talk about that if I watched those people burned alive. No way. No way.
Well, you know, around the early 1300s, when the Templars are destroyed, there's a lot of really strange sects. I mean, there just seem to be a load of them, and the church goes absolutely mad. It's sending the Inquisition round, you know, trying to crush. It's a bit like whack-a-mole, you know, but they crush one another, one rises up. And there's some really interesting ones. There's a woman called Guglielma in northern Italy, and she leads an all-female cult, and she basically says, one of my female followers will be the next pope. And they start rewriting the Bible from a female perspective. I mean, this is the early 1300s,
right?
You know? And it's a kind of almost a feminist movement. And what's interesting is a lot of local people, men and women, say, actually, we quite like this cult. And when this woman dies, she's given a beautiful tomb in the local church by the priests who, you know, they accept her. And when the Pope finds out, he goes absolutely mad. And he sends the Inquisition down to this part of Italy. And they find the women who are the leaders of this cult and they burn them, you know, and they do it very much to say this is not. But, you know, you can repeat the story over and over again. There are loads of cults, very different cults. That one I really like because it's a female cult, and they're going to.
Did they worship the Black Madonna? I'm just curious. The
Black Madonna does feature. I don't know, but I don't think they may not necessarily done. But of course, the Black Madonna does feature another, and especially Mary Magdalene related. You know, and actually, Mary Magdalene is a hugely popular saint. I mean, because a lot of people think, well, she's a fallen woman, but she sits next to God. She'll be able to talk to God on my behalf. She'll understand me, you know. But of course, nowadays, we don't accept the idea that she was a fallen woman. This was church propaganda against her, you know, depicting her as a prostitute. There's no, you know, there is the evidence doesn't stack up in the Bible. This is a 6th century.
It was jealousy, right? It was like jealousy from what I've heard in the Book of Mary.
Yeah, and any agency that women may have had in the church has to be destroyed by the church as it becomes more of a kind of patriarchal, male-dominated affair. Yeah.
Right. And even in Mormonism, that carries over. I mean, it's not a Black Madonna, but there's definitely a mother in heaven, which name is not shared. And, you know, the church calls God Elohim, which I find fascinating because that's plurality, no matter what you do with that. So, you know, people don't know exactly what their theology is, which plays into a lot of things, right? And that's where we get into like, well, what are you worshiping? Well, what do you believe? But they really don't know except the 1%. And this is why I always say, I may come for the Mormons, but it isn't you, Mormon neighbor, Mormon grandma, Mormon aunt that knows none of this. This is for the 1%. And much like the Roman Catholics, anybody, they kept these things for themselves. And they hid everything else and they use them as, and I hate to say this, but I say it all the time, as goyim. They do. They use them, or porch masons, whatever you want to put on them. They have to have a good front. They really do. And then, you know, then they do what they do.
I'll need to come to Utah and learn more about the Mormons.
I'll send you some episodes. They're pretty fun. I actually have, so instead of just talking, I do all of this presentation with slides and proof. And most of it comes from the church and the church history and all this stuff, because you can say anything you want, but a picture's worth 1,000 words. And if you have it, I mean, may as well share it when they're invoking certain, not just angels, but intelligences, which are what? Demons, right? This is on Joseph Smith's paperwork. He had a Jupiter talisman in his pocket when he died. He carried it. And it's the one thing they can't say, oh, that was his, or that was his, or that was his, you know, because the brothers died together. and his
Yeah.
wife wanted it back. And so she identified it and said it was his most prized possession. He was born on the day of Jupiter. He was born on December 23rd. So astrologically, you can't even say it was somebody else's anyways. So the church just kind of hid it forever. And then all this stuff is coming out. Like there's an Atame that the father owned under his sign. Like all of it's astrologically provable. But of course, I'll send you that episode. You might really find it fascinating with your witch
absolutely.
stuff. Yeah, that you're doing
I
right
know,
now.
Sure.
So it might tie in for you somewhere. And I mean, Joseph Smith was Irish and English, which, his mother's name was Lucy Mack Smith. And so I've always looked at it and gone, there's some stuff there. And funny enough, when he was alive, now it went very patriarchal after, and it was somewhat before, but they were allowing women to give blessings anointed with oil to people for healing. And the best one was my relative. Like she had the most healing blessings that helped, that people got better. And she was a Huntington. And all of that went away when Brigham Young came in, because you kind of saw the movie and he was kind of a jerk. So,
yeah. Well, by the way, just on the Cathars, they let women be priests.
Yes.
And that was one of the things that the church went absolutely, and that is, imagine that's in the 1200s AD. That's 800 years ago. People were letting women become priests, and we're still having problems with it now.
It's funny to me. I do think there's a divine, feminine, for lack of a better word, but I think it has to be a together thing, like, I mean, of course, if you can look at one, I'm sure like there's a mother somewhere, like a heavenly mother. And many people say that the Trinity is actually the mother and the father and the baby, right? This goes into Rex Deus again. I don't know,
Goes back to ancient Egypt too. Yeah.
Yes. With her, what's her name? Horus? Is it Horus?
Isis.
The one? Isis. Yes. And the one that got chopped up and she got pregnant anyways, right? Isn't that the story? Hermes, right? Hermes Trismegistus. Yes.
I can never pronounce it, but yeah,
it's a big word. And trice, great, right? And so we look at these things over and over in time, and I just think it's funny how people are like, no, we've got it all figured out. I'm like, hold on. I don't think I'll ever have it all figured out, but I sure like to learn, but B, we can't be so closed-minded as to not see everything. Like you said, this is like Christianity of all different forms. We've just been talking for a minute. We didn't even get into Jewish stuff, like where, Joseph Smith was being trained by an ex-Jewish person right before he dies. And then he gives this speech, which I kind of think got him killed, speaking about how we can become gods, right? And that's their theology. That's their theology, is that they're going to be gods. And I don't like that theology. That's not for me. I'm happy being a servant to the Lord, because that's fine with me. I don't want to be a goddess or a god or any of those things anymore. But I just think it's very dangerous then. I can't imagine, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, you'd have been one way ticket to the, to an incineration.
And then he runs for president to top the cherry. I mean, what on earth? Yeah, no wonder they killed him. They want to talk about polygamy, and look, I don't know what he was doing. If he was polygamist, then he had mastered Tantra to keep his hermetic cup sealed, we'll say, except for his wife, because there's no other children. Okay, so they say. But also remember, who runs the genealogy? Underneath Howard Hughes, that was set up underneath Howard Hughes, who was a favor of the Nazi. He was very ideologically aligned with, yep. And it always goes back to that, right? And I mean, I don't know what to tell people. It just, I do a lot on the Mormon Mafia. I do a 4-part series on Howard Hughes and the Mormons and the Mormon Mafia. And so, and these ties are just fascinating to me. But like I said, this is elite business. This is not for the regular people. Like,
well, you'll enjoy. I think you'll enjoy the third book, because I'm formed a lot of these connections with obviously the Freemasons. It goes all the way. I'm still in the 18th century at the moment. I'm in the early book, but yeah, I mean, it is just kind of like, I mean, you got to remember the Masons. back in the 18th century, they used to claim that the first Masonic lodge was in the Garden of Eden, so we go right back to the beginning and work our way forward. But there's definitely not enough time to go into that. But
no.
But
The Eden thing is
Eden
the
thing
temple ceremony. Yeah,
through ancient
Mormons.
Egypt and the Book of Enoch and all the stuff that
Fascinating. Yeah. I think it's much more aligned with probably, Cathars or something like that at the beginning, or Templars. I can't quite figure it out, but it sure is fun to, go down all of these different rabbit trails. And the fact that Baphomet has continued through now, I think it's corrupted at this point. Like, let's be real. The Church of Satan, Anton LaVey was a showman. Crowley didn't understand alchemy enough to understand that this wasn't actual feces. Okay. Like some of the stuff he was doing as a literalist, the alchemists are probably just shaking their head, right?
Crowley, of course, thought he was the reincarnation of Count Cagliostro.
Yes.
Count Cagliostro, by the way, claimed to have the elixir of eternal life and claimed that he was at the wedding feast at Cana and possibly was at the Last Supper as well. But yeah, I mean, and the image that we have of Baphomet, that you see on heavy metal albums and so on, that's from the 19th century. It's an ex-Catholic priest called Eliphas Levi, and he basically drew that image for one of his books. And now we all think that's what Baphomet. But what somebody in the Middle Ages thought Baphomet looked like, God knows, we just don't know. It's going to be one of those kind of demons you see in a medieval Bible, something horrible. I mean, sometimes
like
they
Abraxas, maybe,
Abraxas, or there's even one I saw the other day in a medieval Bible. It just looked like a black cloud with an angry face on it. I mean, they had weird ideas of what demons looked like, very weird, surreal stuff. So who knows?
Yeah, the greater and lesser keys of Solomon are super fun for all that stuff, and the sigils and all that goes into it. But I mean, like, everybody just throws it out. I mean, they're like, sure, he didn't have that. He didn't talk to anybody. They didn't help build the temple. We don't know, but
yeah.
Fascinating.
And by the way, because I should also say, on the Templars being witches, cats were involved as well with the Templars.
Oh, really?
Let's not forget, you're a cat fan. Oh yeah, they were, and by the way, other heresies at the time, they began to bring cats in, and of course, as we know, witches and cats. But the Templars are associated with cats too. So, yeah.
Yes, and the salamander, right? The salamander was another thing that was a Templar. I'm not sure if it was literal or alchemical because it's not forged by the fire, but I'm sure you've heard about Salem. I don't know if you know, but
because they thought animals had, this went back to kind of
spirits.
Ancient had the bestiaries. They thought animals had different characteristics. That's why we still think that crocodiles cry. It's because of theories about animals from the Middle Ages.
Right. But anything else that we haven't covered that I may have missed?
No, I think, do you know what? I think it's kind of like, I mean, we've covered a lot of bases. And I think it'd be interesting if your, if your viewers, users, do we call them viewers, users, your community, wants to come back with any questions, because, I'm always happy to, answer any questions. And I think, what you've really kind of raised, the kind of with Mormonism, with what you've been saying about Mormonism is really interesting as a kind of like, a modern heresy, in the way that the rest of the Christian church kind of, view it. And, Mormons in a way have got a lot more in common with the Middle Ages before.
Yes, they do.
Give them credit for. But no, I'm really grateful to kind of have the opportunity to kind of chat Templar with you.
Yes.
And as you see, it's kind of like it just overlaps with a load of other stuff, basically, from the Nazis to ancient Egypt. I mean, you can form every connection you want.
I am really excited about this book that you're coming out with on the witchcraft and the Freemasons. The one out is already out, you guys. And will you remind them once again? Yes.
Well, the Knights Templar History and Mystery.
You guys got to get it.
So that gives you the kind of like the medieval history, basically. So it's the starting point. Then the next two books I take you on the kind of areas that I know you're
fascinating.
You're hot on.
Yes. And what was the second one called that's coming out?
The second one's going to be called Downfall of the Templars, Guilty of Diabolic Magic? ?
Ooh. Oh, I'm in line for this. Hot on the presses in November. Get the first one now. Get read up, you guys. And then in November, when this drops, you'll be at the perfect place, because then you can get the new one. And so are these on Amazon, or where can they find these books?
They're everywhere. They're at Barnes and Noble in dollars. So yeah, you can buy them anywhere and everywhere. But and I'm happy to come back and talk witches at some point.
Yeah, let's do it. When you get your second book out, let's do, when it's getting ready to come out, like, let's do it again and get this out here to remind people to get these books, because fascinating stuff, you guys. History isn't boring. This certainly isn't boring. And Tony, you have definitely not been boring. You've been a wonderful guest. Thank you so much.
Non-nobis domine, I would say.
Thank you so much. And for anybody that wants to find you to follow other things of yours, can they find you somewhere?
Well, go along to my blog, thetemplarknight.com, or you can find me on YouTube. I'm the History Bear.
There it is, you guys. Yes. Find him, check out all his stuff. He knows what he's doing. It's fascinating stuff. You guys don't want to miss it. So thanks again, Tony, for being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Take
Bye.
care.